Alright, Grizo, here we go. Let's go all the way in, shall we? I'm just gonna start doing video responses because typing is a bitch and I be throwing too many typos. It takes too damn long. I'm long-winded and so very elaborative. So I'm just gonna start doing these video posts, man. Or video responses. First, you got me twisted, bro. You got me way misconstrued. And this is the problem I have with a few other of our homeboys that don't fully digest what I'm saying before they try to categorize me and put me in some sort of box. So now I'm right-wing conspiracy theorist, Tea Party, whatever it is you just labeled me as. Right? Basically, you're saying I'm a fucking racist. Okay? Now let me explain something to you. Nowadays, with this politically correct bullshit that everybody are caught up in, you're not allowed to have an opinion about race issues if you're white. And if you do, of course, you are then labeled as some sort of racist or something. Let me explain where I'm coming from that has obviously changed your opinion of me, which is a new topic because of the Black Lives Matter movement. This is somewhat new. I mean, the idea of oppression and police brutality is not new. I've been posting and speaking out against police brutality and the reform that is needed when it comes to training and choosing who carry guns in our streets and who police our streets. I've been talking about that for years, long before the Black Lives Matter movement even existed. Now here's my problem with it. There's bad apples. There's bad apples in police forces. There's bad apples inside of our government. There's bad apples inside of every single movement that you can imagine. If it's a movement that goes against the agenda of the funding entities, the powerful people with money, if it's a movement that goes against that, they infiltrate it. Now, there's also people that are just not as smart as a lot of the leaders that get into these movements and decide that they're so damn angry and they don't have enough self-control that they do and say things that make the movement look bad. For example, rioting in the streets prior to any investigation of a police shooting. These riots end up being violent, people get hurt, property gets damaged in communities where these people live. But the rioting and the violence that's occurring without waiting to see what the actual details of the case are, for example in Charlotte, they want to automatically jump to conclusions and try to say it's a white racist cop or whatever killing another innocent black person. Well, what pisses me off is that if they would have waited, they would have realized that it was not that. It was a black cop and the dude had a gun, right? Now, those occurrences exist, and the occurrences exist where it's a cop who's basically a coward and pulls the trigger way too early. And we could argue whether or not every single one of those occurrences is based on race and the cop being racist or not, but I disagree with that as well. What I'm saying is, with the cops, we have a problem with training, we have a problem with choosing and hiring. We have a systematic issue when it comes to who gets to carry a gun and a badge. That's a problem. Now, if those cops happen to be cowardly and intimidated easily, and they end up being the one that shoots an innocent person, whether they're black, white, gold, they should be fired and jailed. If anybody does anything like that, they should go to jail. When you have a Black Lives Matter movement, which was started on the back of Michael Brown, is what made it very popular. I know Trayvon Martin was the first one, but Michael Brown, hands up, don't shoot. But then the investigation proves that he was not a great guy. He wasn't innocent. And there's facts that prove it. But this entire movement was kind of started on that basis. And since then, there's been however many police shootings, lots and lots and lots of police shootings, that more than half of them turn out to be justified shootings. But people are already rioting, people are already committing violence and inciting violence. Okay? So here's what I'm against, and here's what I'm trying to say. I'm not against black people speaking out against oppression and police brutality. That's stupid to say. I've been speaking out against those things myself for a very long time. But now that there's this new movement out that is committing violence and adding to the fire, adding fuel to the fire of violence and racial divide, the movement is not organized. The movement is not collectively on point and on the same page with each other. You have people at some of these protests screaming racial slurs at white people, telling white people they can't participate. You have groups of people screaming Black Lives Matter that are jumping white people and doing all this violent shit all over the country. Those are the bad apples. Just like within the police forces, there's the bad apples that do horrible things and they should be punished. So why isn't the movement that is technically for a good cause, police brutality and systematic racism, why isn't that movement screaming outwardly against the bad apples and telling them to calm the fuck down and telling people how to act? Where's the good guys inside the movement speaking against the bad apples? Just like all the cops across the country who are speaking about how the bad apple cops should be punished and made out as examples. But even bigger than that, I've been speaking about oppression and racial divide and systematic racism for a long time, but what people don't want to understand is how the argument is ground level. What about the leadership? What about the politicians? What about the government officials, the people that we supposedly elected into office that are adding and contributing by passing bills and laws that hurt the inner city worse and worse over years and years? And what about the facts? What about the facts that the majority of black people and minorities are always supportive, not always, but majority, we're talking 80% and higher, supportive of the Democratic Party blindly, without looking into history of what the Democratic Party has represented? And I'm no damn Republican, but what I'll say about the two-party system is that it has divided us. It is controlling what people think when it comes to politics. It's putting people in boxes based on blind loyalty. And this is the systematic part of the racial divide that I'm talking about. The leaders over the years, through policy making, who have contributed to the systematic racism and oppression of all lower class getting worse. The laws and the bills and that have been passed, the history of who voted on what back in the 1860s, bro. Who voted for the 13th and the 14th Amendments? Which president was doing what? Lincoln, Jackson. Which party were they a part of? Which party started the KKK? These are the type of things that people don't think about when they decide to voice their opinions about my opinions without fully digesting what I actually say. What I'm actually saying is that the racial divide and the systematic racism and the oppression is worse than what most people try to talk to me about. It's from the top down. The solutions and the fixes are prevented by the people that want to keep the divide and the argument and the fighting going, preventing us from uniting. You argue with me, lifelong friend, trying to say that I'm got some kind of right wing. I don't even know what the fuck that means, bro. I just know that there's bad apples in every group. There's bad apples in the Black Lives Matter movement. I agree with the majority of what the positive leaders of the Black Lives Matter movement are saying, and I've posted plenty of videos about that. But you don't want to talk about that. You just want to talk about my negative opinions about the movement, which are simply about the bad apples that are making the movement look bad. What is wrong with that? Just like I say, the bad cops gotta go. Okay? I'm no biased cop person. I've had way too many negative run-ins with the cops. I've witnessed way too many of my friends fucked with by the cops. I know there's bad cops, but there's also bad people inside of this movement that are making it look bad and making its whole, and just pissing on its whole cause. People jumping people because they're white and all of these things. The media stirring up the divide by only covering the cases that will hype people up. The systematic part of the racial divide that I'm referencing is the leadership that controls the media and the narrative that is being widespread. Not who is inside of each police car. It's the system that has allowed those people to become inside of that police car. It's the leadership at the tops of these departments that get their marching orders from the tops of those city governments. The city governments that have the worst crime stats in our country have been democratically ran for 50 years plus. Look at Chicago, DC, Detroit, New Orleans, etc. It's the policies from the top, policies from the leadership that allow these problems to continue. And it's the same money that funds these politicians, that funds the media in order to keep this issue alive. So you arguing with me because you think I've got some opinion that I don't. My opinion is just like yours, except I'm saying that it's worse. It's worse than you say. And it's the leadership. And here's where we disagree. And here's where you would prevent yourself from fully agreeing with me. And I feel that our current president, although majority supported by mostly minorities, my point is that the education of the people, the information dissemination through the media, is what is controlled and censored by the people who want to keep the racial argument going. This has been the way it is for years. Our president has contributed to that divide. He talks about his love for Islam more than he does his love for Americans. He hasn't done anything to benefit the lower class or the minority population. Drop a list for me. All presidents have to do a few good things and have a few good programs, but the majority of what he's done is hurting everybody, especially the lower class. Look at Obamacare. It hurts minorities the worst because they're limited on how many hours they can work because their employers can't afford the coverage. It's just came out. Obama's trying to block the numbers from coming out November 1st. He wants to push it back to December 1st because it's going to prove that everybody's getting screwed by that program, especially the most poor people in this country. If our leadership is allowing and contributing to the growth of the negative inside of our inner cities, the shootings and the deaths and the killings, and nobody wants to be honest about the facts and blame every single thing on every single cop shooting and allow for riots to occur and you know, hype the anger so that more rioting and more violence occurs without the patience of letting an investigation occur. What happened to peaceful protesting, man? Here's the other thing. Leadership. Well, funding. Who's funding who? Follow the money. People like Soros are funding the group, the movement. They're paying people to become agitators inside of these protests. This ain't new either. Paid protests. You got a peaceful protest happening. A couple thousand people, a few hundred people marching peacefully, people out in the streets going, speaking nothing but peace. And all of a sudden, a group of masked dudes come in there and start committing violence. That's the bad apples, bro. Desperate people looking for a paycheck. Or desperate, ignorant people who are just angry and passionate and have been taught by the wrong, they're misguided. So what I'm saying is, and it should stop here, and the chapter should be closed on this SQ might could be racist bullshit. I'm talking about the control of the media narrative. I'm talking about the systematic racial divide coming down from our leaders, especially inside of the inner cities where the crimes are the worst. Why is Black Lives Matter not talking about the 4,000 plus shootings that have occurred in Chicago, a gun-free zone, a democratically ran city for over 50 years? Rahm Emanuel being the mayor who says, never let a good crisis go to waste. Use it to progress your agenda. My point is that we got some evil, corrupt ass leaders using the passions of the minority people to create a divide in this country so that we cannot unite against them. You don't want to buy into that because we got a black president, and you would have to admit that he's not a good guy. Hillary Clinton is horribly worse. So what I'm talking about, it boils down to this: the bad apples. The bad apples in the government, the bad apples in the police forces, the bad apples in the committees and the groups and all the different branches of government who have been put in, selected, not elected, who contribute to these policies that bolster the anger and the negativity. The bad apples in the media who control and run the talking points that are passed down now from the White House. The bad apples inside of, great example, Muslims. Not all Muslims are bad. Not all Islamic people are bad. But there's a pretty large percentage of them who actually are raised to be radical, extreme, jihadi types. Those are bad guys. So to say that those guys exist doesn't make me against Muslims. It makes me against those bad apples that have been misguided. So you want to drop all these little kind of sly little insulties at me because you formed an opinion based on whatever, and I seriously doubt you've read most of my posts. And if you have, then we have a reading comprehension issue, because I've never once said anything that should lead any of my friends, especially my black friends, to think that I'm racist. I'm against the systematic decline of leadership in this country, which is contributing to all of our racial issues, making them worse, making them bigger than they should be, and not focusing on the real problems inside of the inner cities and the leadership inside of these inner cities that are creating these crime waves, these stats. If you take away the top 5 murder by gun cities in our country, we drop from number 3 in the world to 40th on the murder by gun statistics. It's like 5 to 7 cities that contribute to all of our stats. And if you don't consider that, then you cannot possibly understand all of it. Those cities are all ran by the same types of leadership with the same templated type of government. Puppets. It's all designed to keep us divided. That's what I'm always talking about. Media, government, police, and then these race-motivated movements. But it's not them, it's the bad apples within them. If you don't follow me on that, bro, then we lost. I'm gonna start doing these video responses, man, because this is a lot better than typing all of this out. And if you still have any more questions, hit me back.